We're just really, really excited to have these two folks here. We've been waiting a long time for them to come. And I'm going to give you a little, it's going to be quick. I'm going to tell you about the show as a whole, but I'm going to let you figure that out because there's a lot of information out in front. You can pick up a little booklet that we made and a little bit of biographical information. You can find out more about what we're doing here. The one thing I wanted to tell you definitely, though, is we're having something called a Come Together tomorrow between 1:30 and 6:30, where we've gotten 9 different people from around MIT to come together and talk about science, technology, and social responsibility. It's going to be very, very interesting. Each of them are going to talk for 15 minutes. So you can come in and out, listen to what you want. I think there's a schedule somewhere. It's probably out on the table with the MIT Press books. So that is for tomorrow, just so you know. So my name's Larissa Harris. Most of you know me. I'm the associate director here. I'm just going to introduce Harold and John very quickly, and then they can proceed. So Harold Ledger is there. He came and seen his talk here earlier this year in February, and it was really fantastic. His work, I would say, celebrates the ephemerality and energy of everyday life. It spans video, photography, drawing, and teaching, actually. So over the past 15 years, he's exhibited at SACMA, Drawing Center, Socrates Sculpture Park, diverse works, PICA, and international pretty extensively. And he also was in the 2004 Whitney Biennial, and in 2002 started a participatory website called Learning to Love You More with Miranda July, who was also here last year. Should I heard? I've heard of. Now, John Malpeat is actually an old friend of the director, Christoph Hitchcock's, and so it's for that one. So I wanted to also say that Christoph is very sad that he's not here tonight to personally introduce him. But John's been working in performance since the late 1970s, first in New York City, then in LA, where in 1985 he founded and still directs the Los Angeles Poverty Department, or LAPD, which is a grassroots ensemble theater founded to work in and with the homeless community on Skid Row in LA. In 2001, he started working with Aftershock, which is a media arts center in eastern Kentucky, to create RFK and EKY, which is on view up front. He's one of the most dedicated, innovative, and radical theater artists of our time, and we're very proud to have him and learn more about his work. Harold is going to be doing a little bit of interviewing. It's mostly going to be John talking about projects. So thanks very much for coming. Good.
It's working, right?
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for coming, and thanks for the introduction, Larissa. I'm really happy to be here with John Malpeat, who has always been one of my heroes and a really early inspiration for me in the work that I've done. So we're just going to sort of show, and John's going to read some of his pieces, and then we're going to have a little discussion in between. And I think we want to also just open it up to you all. If you have a question, feel free to let us know what that is, and we'll try to work that in as we go along. And thanks for waiting. Sorry about the technical difficulties and delay here. So John's going to start off by reading an early piece, monologue.
Yeah, actually, it's sort of the piece that got me to LA, and it's something that it was. Yeah, I was living in New York. They were filling in the Hudson River, you know, with. It was sort of an alchemical idea. You take dirty river water and you mix in a lot of sand, and then you create the world's most expensive piece of real estate. And so they were doing this but there were a few, you know, bad apples who slowed it down quite a bit with environmental impact studies for about 10 years. And during that time, this is like what's now Battery Park City and the World Financial Center. So for about 10 years, it was just a sand dune on the west side of New York. And it was a great place to, like, you know, go get some faux nature or something like that and see the sunset and stuff. And eventually, Art on the Beach took it over. And during the summertime, they had commissions of different artists. And they would be usually like a sculptural manifestation. So there'd be like about 9 or so collaborations. And then there'd be a performative element which used to run, so each week one of those would, you know, open up like that. And So in '84, I did one with Erica Rothenberg and Laurie Hawkinson, who is an architect in New York. And we built a big orange megaphone that was pointed across the street at the then World Trade Centers. And it was called the Freedom of Expression National Monument. And the idea is you would go up that ramp and you could say whatever you had to say to the powers that be. And so as we conceptualized the thing, I knew I could use this in some sense in a performance. And the performance I decided to do was about, at that point, you know, like, it was about homelessness, basically. And also about sort of, there was a big international banking Ponzi scheme that was happening at that time as well. And so it was about those two things. And then it happened that while I had to write it, which was the early part of the summer, I was in LA. And it turned out, and so it was '84, it was right before the Olympics. It turned out there was a lot of civic activity in Los Angeles, a lot of deep thought going on in the city council, where there were suggestions like, how can we make the city good for the Olympics? And one was to like, well, let's open up the internment camps that were used for Japanese Americans during World War II, and send the homeless people there to sort of. So I started going to government hearings, and I met all these grassroots activists who were working in tandem with lawyers mounting class action suits against the County of Los Angeles to enforce the Constitution of the state of California, which means giving homeless people decent places to go to live and stuff. So as a result, I was able to make a monologue that was like very accurate and as accurate and as hallucinated as reality, And so, I played two characters. One was named Moto, and the other was his friend, not identified otherwise. And sometimes I would use the megaphone, and then sometimes I'd run down. I had a little megaphone and like that. So I'm going to read the opening of that, and I have some. On the DVD, if we should be able to find something that says Olympic Update or something like that, and then we can get the Olympic, we can get the Olympic hymn, and then that's just, after that it's just visuals, and I'll sort of fill in the blanks over here.
Which one?
It's on the one that has a bunch of different things. I think it's called MIT Disc. Olympic Update? Let's take a look. Oh yeah, it's that one.
Okay, Art of the
Oh, sick. Sorry. This is beautiful. This is perfect. So we're dispensing with the national anthem, which comes later. And so the opening of this piece was me and Moto. We just came from Los Angeles, and on behalf of the city of Los Angeles, home of the 1984 Olympics and the homeless capital of America, Moto and I have been asked by the LAOOC, the Los Angeles Committee for the Organizing of Olympics, to travel this land and to travel this land during the Olympics and to tell the people of our land this Olympic Update report. And they asked us to do this. They paid us to do this. They gave us one-way bus tickets to travel America and to come here. They gave us one-way bus tickets, they paid for them, and this is called Greyhound therapy. And we were in Los Angeles for the Olympics, and what the Olympics were like, the Olympics were just like the movie Blue Thunder, because Blue Thunder was in Los Angeles, and just like in the movie Blue Thunder, there were super helicopters like Blue Thunder from the LAPD Skywatch watching down from the sky. And there were Olympic helicopters all over the city. They were everywhere, the shiny ones, and not the puffy helicopters that are round like balls, but the long, skinny ones like Blue Thunder that look like giant grasshoppers, and they can see through walls. And they can point right at you, and they know how cold or how hot you are. And they can find you and shoot you down just because you're warm thinking the wrong thoughts. And you thought there weren't any more of them because in Blue Thunder, Roy Snyder shot them down with the old-fashioned bubble helicopter and got the tape to the TV station that showed how they were going to look through walls and go into your mind and read it even when you were sleeping. But now there are Olympic helicopters, and they fly over the city, and they sit on the sides of the skyscrapers like the 17-year locusts. Like when the 17-year locusts came and they covered all the trees in all of Ohio, and they ate all of the leaves off of all of the trees in all of Ohio. And now, the Olympic helicopters, they sit on the sides of the buildings reading thoughts and looking for terrorists. And then the LAPD, they come down to the Skid Row Park at 6th and Gladys, across the street from the Catholic Worker Hippie Kitchen and the Regal Hotel, and they make everyone lie down on the ground with their heads behind their hands. And they talk through the walkie-talkies to the Olympic helicopters, and the Olympic helicopters, oh, we've got some cameras down there. And the Olympic helicopters read the minds of the people lying on the ground. And they signal to the LAPD, yes, we do, we got some money. And the LAPD, they take them away, and they put them in jail so that we can have the Olympics. And if you're a terrorist, you can pretend that you're not by thinking cool thoughts all day long. But when you fall asleep, the terrorist thoughts will come back into your head. And the Olympic helicopters, no matter where you are, they will feel the heat and they will find you. And now that all the terrorists have been plucked up and carried off to jail by the Olympic helicopters, you can get a bed at the Weingart Center or at the Midnight Mission. And before the Olympics, you hardly ever could, and you have to sleep outside in a box, all around the Midnight Mission, on Main Street, box, back in the alley, in your box, back. And it's okay. It's good. Because if you're sleeping there with everyone in boxes, you're not going to get into any trouble. Not like the old lady who slept all alone in the goofy car decorated with balls in the vacant lot, 5th and Wall. She got cut up.
Okay. So that was great. I hadn't heard that one before, so that was really amazing. One of the things I was thinking about was that in that role you were sort of playing a homeless person, and then you went on with LAPD to actually work with homeless people who then represented themselves.
Right.
But at that point you'd been in Los Angeles, and had you started working with a legal aid organization?
Well, when I wrote that, I went out there in June of '84 and went to all these hearings and stuff like that, and started working on this piece. And then I started volunteering. I went to government hearings and started volunteering with these grassroots activists who were mobilizing homeless people to go to the city and testify about the conditions of the hotels they were sent to and stuff like that. But then I did this in August in New York, and during July, I think I was in upstate New York writing it. So I was just sort of tiptoeing, and I didn't, I didn't know I was moving to Los Angeles. I didn't know I didn't know much.
Mm-hmm. So that was in '84, and then in '85 you wound up moving to Los Angeles and starting Los Angeles Poverty Department.
Yeah,
And then in '86 did your first performance with them, with the group.
right. Yeah, what happened was I felt like I had fallen into a significant, meaningful and situation in LA just because of the connections I had made there when I was writing this piece or researching this piece, which were, working with, like I said, there were these people, the Catholic Worker, which is among its other, it's a left-wing Catholic organization, lay Catholic, dissident Catholics, who started in the 30s in New York by Dorothy Day, and it's still there in the East Village, and they provide hospitality to homeless people. They're also like the first people in the country to demonstrate against the bomb, for example, So they're a bunch of Catholic pacifist dissidents. And it turned out by accident, when I went to these government hearings, they were the people who were doing this organizing. So even though I had sort of read Dorothy Day's books and lived 4 blocks away in the East Village and sort of, been really into it, I'd never actually gone down there, And so suddenly by accident there I was.
Across the country on the other.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when you actually.
Yeah. So anyway, and because they had this, later that at Christmas, at the end of '84, they organized a tent city across the street from City Hall in LA, where they housed like 300 homeless people. And again, it was all orchestrated with lawsuits, class action suits, which later in the decade, in the late '80s, it became illegal for nonprofit law organizations getting money from the government to mount class action suits, which effectively defanged the few nonprofit lawyers that are out there. Because effective lawsuits are about money, right? So if you can sue on behalf of 30,000 homeless people, that's a lot of bucks. If you sue on behalf of one homeless person about not receiving their $200, then they can laugh that off and keep you busy doing meaningless work, which is what was perfected later on in sort of the high Reagan period. But this was earlier in the Reagan period.
So what was the formation of Los Angeles Poverty Department? How did you actually get that together?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was sort of an accident. Like I said, I was following my nose. But this free law center on Skid Row that I started working with, that grew out of Catholic Worker, they were, the director, Nancy Minnie, she was sort of into it. And at that time, another thing that's been disappeared, now the whole California Arts Council has been disappeared. It still exists, but they don't give out any money. They send out a newsletter and email.
Yeah.
But at that time, they had a really vital program, which was artists in communities, and they gave out a lot of money.
I did that myself later.
Yeah. So with Nancy Minnie, we wrote a grant to them, and then some Harriet Barlow up in Blue Mountain Center in upstate New York, where I had gone to actually write the thing. She also raised some money for me to go back out there in the fall and work on. Or no, I guess in the fall I went and worked on my own dime on the tent city. But then in the spring, we raised some money so I could be there for 3 or 4 or 5 months, not knowing what would happen. And then this grant came in. And so then we were obliged to start these workshops. And by that time, they'd already offered me a job working as a homeless advocate. So I had taken that job. So I was helping people get welfare benefits or housing or their belongings that had been taken away from them by their hotel.
And this is with no social work training, really?
And with no art training either, so it was good. That's how I got my legal training.
But you had come out of doing performance work of your own in New York that didn't have a social component to it, and then transitioned into that through the social service work that you were doing in Los Angeles, to some degree.
Well, I'd done some stuff that was social, but 50% of the stuff I had done before, say, was, about social stuff, and 50% was about personal hallucinations, And, anyway, that was my credential, that I was like inquiring artist wants to know,
Right.
And so then I was doing these welfare cases, and so when I got the grant from California Arts Council, then it was like, yikes, we really got to do this thing, you know? So I gave George Fry and Leroy Sunshine Mills a bunch of flyers. They were clients of mine. And Sunshine is, I just talked to him yesterday. I mean, we stay in touch. He's still involved. I saw him earlier in the week in LA at an LAPD thing. So anyway, I said, you know, pass these flyers out, you know, and a lot of people, it turned out a lot of people came, you know, and most people came with like, you know, this is LA, they came with screenplays, you know, that no one had ever read, or entire hip hop albums that no one had ever heard, you know. And so nobody really wanted to, no one wanted to take the time to listen to your entire novel when they were holding on to the greatest rap album that ever happened, you know. So it was sort of like, we had all 12 or 15 of the greatest works going on simultaneously, you know, is really the way it worked out. So, the first thing we did indoors was called South of the Clouds, and it was a series of monologues based on the premise that, you know, I mean, most art I think is like pragmatic and nuts and boltsy, you know. But this was like, well, what happens if somebody doesn't show up? Well, then we just leave that part out, you know. And also because people didn't seem to be good at like sharing the stage, we thought, well, it's monologues, you know. And so we did that, and sure enough, after the first weekend, somebody did disappear, and rather than drop out his monologue, we had someone else do it, and with an update on where we thought this guy was, which included San Francisco and eventually kidnapped by Martians, you know. And later on the show you saw at SFAI was about, we brought him up there 2 years later to explain what had happened to him during the interim, which he did in part of that show. But
so then you transitioned into pieces where everyone was sort of working together. It wasn't just monologues.
Yeah, the second show we really gave into the chaos, you know, and we created a show called, which we're going to see a little bit of, called. I'll tell a little bit about it though first. Called No Stone for Stud Schwartz, and it was really it was about giving into the chaos and creating, and so the veracity of the show was sort of the energy of the show. It was a totally it was a goofy little story that Jim Beam had come up with about a guy who had organized the wrong union. He was supposed to have organized the Teamsters, but he organized the AFL-CIO, and as a result. Don't do that. He was being chased all around the world ultimately by the Teamsters. And so it was a goofy little story, you know, and I wrapped a sunset monologue sort of thing around it so that at the beginning, the narrator's lying dead on the stage, he gets up, tells a story, and at the end you see him get killed. And the reason was, at that time there had been 3 or 4 sort of point-blank shootings, assassinations, you know, of homeless people who were sleeping, not in Skid Row, where there are thousands of people sleeping, but like on the edge of Skid Row. And Jim Beam, the main character, was somebody in that. He was doing that. He was sleeping near Chinatown, near Union Station, and he was like a very smart but very volatile schizophrenic guy who could create chaos, you know, easily. So he was a really vulnerable person in a really chaotic situation, which made it all more combustible. So so he narrated the story. He got up, he narrated the story. The catch was he would often get stuck in particular things and would go into litanies of like, sort of like this person begat that person, or the lineups of he was very into the Boston Celtics of the Cousy era, actually. And he started talking about the lineup. So I ended up playing his stunt double, and when he would bog down, I would jump in and continue the narrative, which would piss him off sufficiently that he would jump back in and get me out of there. So we can see the beginning of that. And it's called No Stone for Stud Schwartz, if you can find it on that.
Is that the No Stone eulogy?
Let's see, there are 2 things on there, wait. Oh no, that's the one that's on the DVHS, yeah.
So this is sort of similar to the performance that I saw in 1988 that was done at the San Francisco Art Institute. That was a much more chaotic one, where you were sort of jumping in and filling in on people's roles and doing lines. Yeah,
this was the first one, and then we went to San Francisco for a month on a residency and made the second one, which is the one you saw, and then we also showed this one at the beginning of that residency.
I was there. Me and Art kind of went over there to the UPS coffee. Then went over here to the station. Check it out. We get in there, halfway down through there, we're past one inch. We get in. See these two guys talking. One of them is kind of. This guy stops and we got him next up the ground. Hey, I know you, man. Hey, I know you, man. I know you. I know you, man. Yeah. Maybe someone who looks like me. No, man. I know you, man. Oh, yeah, yeah. Let's go, Lord. When we saw that, see you in the guy's eye. End of the story. It wasn't all the same. Hey. Come on. I'm sick of being your alter ego. I said, get my ego altered. What are you doing? Your ego on it. On your own. What? The ones who wish you got it. Wait. 1900, you don't need space. Now, 1987. 73. I take a whole. Wait a minute. Take a strike 3. It's just the ones who Louisiana what? Louisiana could die than what? I was talking about the ones who Louisiana beat out of Miami Beach. You tell me where you was on my back. Bullshit, your friends, Schwartz, your friends. Told that. I was working for an old Irish priest. Wanted to become a Trappist monk. He had 3 daughters, wife died. And he wrote a book similar to Thomas Burton's, sat the story out. I worked there as a porter, clean up the place. He introduced me to a friend of, an old friend of his named Tiger Flowers. Hey, baby, what's up? Oh, Daddy, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Yeah. Are you flying around? Yeah, but I heard you needed some money, man. Oh, I need money bad. Oh, that's good. What do you have to do? Go down and what, man? Fix some things. Please put it up. Maybe where more Frankie got over here. Philadelphia. What are you going to do? What are you going to do for that money? Just go down and watch. Oh, man, I got $4 grand. Can you take it? Is that for real? Oh, just one round? One round. What about the ready to fight scene in Louisiana? Oh, okay. 4 grand again. Hey, wait a minute. Maybe for them or Frankie Gobble, they put Tony's brother in the clan. Yeah. No problem. Yeah, that's right. He's a great man. Bring the color on. Yeah. Flank's tough in this town. Don't things ever ring. He was starting riots. He was sissy. I don't know, maybe serious. I'll do it. I'll see you when we get set. Let's go. We want to see some blood.
So anyway, stop there.
Mr. Easy, man. Mr. Season.
So those pieces weren't scripted in that they weren't written down,
Right.
but you rehearsed them.
Yeah, we rehearsed them, yeah.
Okay.
And that's that also covered for like people not showing up and stuff
Right.
like that, because everyone would know all the roles at a certain point.
Right. That was one of the things when I saw the performance that really struck me was that you were sort of walking in and interacting in a way that I think maybe my concept in going in to see what this was going to be and the way it was introduced to me, the idea of, oh, this is some homeless people that are going to do a theater piece. And I was sort of picturing like, doing a version of Shakespeare or something like that. And that it was going to be kind of soft in this way. And instead I walked in and it was just utter chaos and this completely non-scripted seeming thing. But at the same time that there was lighting and there were things that were happening that kept making you go back and forth like this seems sort of professional and then it seems totally chaotic. And you were running in and out, always sort of doing people's lines or instigating something.
Yeah.
And that was what was so exciting to me, was seeing you actually doing all of those things in a really physical way and in a not in this kind of like what I guess I thought of as kind of like a tough love approach, like sort of holding everything together, pulling it together, and drawing out these really amazing performances from everybody.
I think in that show, I mean, we played it on three sides. In that later on, the thing that was on the backdrop, we put on the floor as the boxing ring and played it, on with the audience on four sides. And the cast would sit in the audience, and just like in a rehearsal, when somebody would be doing something, people would be screaming stuff out, like bullshit or talking about something irrelevant or something else. So we kept that during the show, right? So people would be screaming things in from the audience and then just jumping out to do their scene. And then I was continuing to be his double so that, to keep the thing moving. Or, yeah, as you said, if it was moving too well, then I'd come in to mess it up and get this other layer of the real, sort of unleash a layer of reality if it wasn't there, or vice versa, or something like that. And it was, like I said, the story, initially Jim's story was he was being chased by the Teamsters for organizing the wrong union. But myself and some other people in the show, for me what was important was the rapper, the Sunset Boulevard rapper, which was that vulnerable people were in a chaotic environment and were even being assassinated as that real element was indicative of the danger that everybody living on the streets was in. And so for me, it was important that it not end with him being assassinated by the mobsters. So we had two guys who were real into that, DJ and Julius. But that it happened some other way. And because the whole thing was improvised, you never knew which night, how it was going to play out, whether, what narrative would be apparent, whether that he was killed by some Skid Row assassin or by the Teamster guys. And in fact, one time, in one performance, I tackled the DJ to prevent him from doing the Teamster result, So it was very live, you didn't exactly know what was going to happen.
And you were sort of asserting your own control to a certain extent. I mean, it's like
I was actively participating.
I mean, you were the director, but in this case, instead of just sort of like directing during the rehearsal, during the performance to direct the performance, you would just like tackle someone.
Yeah, I was using being the authority of being the director to get away with causing a lot of trouble. So I could be the bad guy, the bad kid in class, and the teacher at the same time.
I mean, one of my questions that were coming out of that was just, what are your thoughts on working with non-trained artists, performers? I mean, I realize that you two aren't like classically trained or something, but you did go through being in New York and being exposed to performance and doing performance yourself, and then bringing that to people who hadn't had those experiences and working with them. And to, I think to a large extent there is this sort of concern about people doing that, and I get this a lot myself, that somehow as a trained artist in whatever way you're trained, working with untrained people, that there's this potential for sort of exploitation or that you're imposing your will on them or something. So which I don't think, that was what was sort of all broken open for me when I saw your performance. And I just wanted to hear your comments on that. dynamic?
Well, I mean, in that case, I was sort of setting up a situation where everybody could inflict their will on everybody else, you know?
Right.
And I mean, a couple things. One is I don't believe in talent, you know, I believe that everybody is cool, you know, in their own way. And the other thing is, I think, you know, you gotta, like, I think you gotta be willing to show yourself off in a less than perfect light, you know, and that makes things cool, you know.
It's actually sort of similar to this visual artist Thomas Hirschhorn and the work that he does. Are you familiar with his work a little bit?
Yeah, I know a little bit.
And you know, the idea of the sort of like tyranny of quality, the idea that something that's well acted means that there's actual meaning or content to it, when in fact maybe that's just a purely superficial thing, and that something that seems like it's not quote unquote well acted could actually have a lot more meaning or, you know, energy within it.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely about energy. What was funny about it is, like, there was even there was a lot written about this piece because it sort of exploded what you were supposed to be getting out of, you know, you weren't getting. Most people understood that you weren't getting like the story of how someone hit the street. You know, it was more about something more evanescent about everybody, you know, and about the environment. But there was one person who wrote a review about that this was the story of Jim Beam's, or of Sted Schwartz's life, you know, that this was autobiography, you know, I forget what the thought was, but the thought was basically that it wasn't an autobiography. It was, you know, at all. It was, and it had something to say on the energetic level. It really captured the energy of Skid Row, basically, and the sort of heightened, you know, life and death of being really close together, humor as well, no irony. You know, the biggest thing about moving from New York to there is like no irony. You know, and so that was what was interesting about that show, was it really captured the energy of the place, not the story. Like I said, was a B movie. You know, it wasn't. And yeah, and then Jim went on to live at my house for 2 years, actually, Sted Schwartz, and during that time, I tried to get him a benefit that he'd been kicked. There's a SSI, a disability benefit, that he had been kicked off of during when Reagan came in. He made everyone who was on SSI recertify to get their benefit. So of course the people who are like the most disabled failed to negotiate the recertification, and so
Which is a similar thing has been going on lately too with the Bush administration.
Yeah. So he ended up on the street, and so I got one night when it was raining, somebody else in LAPD said, "Take Jim home." So I did, but he stayed for 2 years, and during that time I tried to get him SSI, and actually after 1 year I did get, working with a lawyer, Louise Monaco, who specialized in these kind of cases. We got the money, you know, but then the next year he wouldn't take it, and I spent a whole year trying to get him to take it, and. It's not on our flight path, but I think I mentioned it to you when we were talking. There's a little thing I did recently which sort of recounts that, and look, you know, I'd say I come off pretty. I mean, you could see how I'm not, you know, pretty unflattering in a certain way, you know, and I think that's what's important to like going back to your question before about, you know, I think how can you work with non-trained people, blah blah blah, just by being, you know,
Keep it real.
Obnoxious yourself, you know. So we could see that. That's a little bit off the flight path. I don't know what the time is like.
I think maybe we should move on to agent assets.
Okay.
So, I mean, the LAPD continued with traveling projects that were part of LAPD Inspects America, and then also went on to Europe as well.
Yeah.
Bringing some of the people from Los Angeles, and then picking up people along the way to do performances. Yeah. And then eventually we arrive at Agents and Assets, which you have a clip from, right?
Yeah. So many years later, yeah, we did, after the show that Harold first saw, which was our first residency performance. People got really interested in the notion of having us come and work in their community in an extended way. So we did a whole series of performances called LAPD Inspects America, and then we went to Europe and beyond, where we would go and we would, depending on the setting, we would work with an arts organization and a social service organization if there was one. Sometimes we just, like in Philadelphia, we just recruited people out of the subway in the welfare office. And so a lot of places we made first links between arts organizations and social service organizations and stuff. And it was like a Mission Impossible kind of project where you go, the ideal, I mean, the best case scenario was 6 weeks in a city where you do all this kind of rounding people up and all that, and you make a show, and you have to present it in front of everybody, and then, so, and sometimes we did it in much shorter frames of reference. So we did a lot of that into the mid-90s. And then there were a lot of other people in LAPD who would come up through the ranks who directed a lot of shows in the mid-90s. Kevin Williams, who you saw at the beginning of that, doing the very beginning of it, he did some, and then there was another guy named David Hallenda who did a lot of shows, and then somewhere around the time that Clinton did the welfare reform, it was right also when Kurosawa died, and I happened to see the movie Redbeard. With a friend of mine, we were watching a lot of Kurosawa movies after he died. And that movie had such a what I thought is such an accurate portrayal of poverty that I thought LAPD would really connect to this. So we did a performance where we showed the movie, not on a screen, but on TV, and then with having the cast alongside and like in a really small room, like to these pillars with 2 rows of audience on the other side, where we played the movie in Japanese with no subtitles, and then we did the lines in English, and also sometimes abstracted movement or did group choral kind of reactions and stuff like that. So it wasn't improvised. It was totally scripted. There was no personal stories involved, because a lot of we did get into a lot of personal stories in a lot of shows that we had done. And out of that, I think then came Agents and Assets, which is is another scripted show. The found text is from the U.S. Congress, a hearing of the House Intelligence Committee, which has been in the news a lot now. And they're supposed to have oversight of the intelligence gathering agencies. At the time we did it, Porter Goss, who's now the head of the CIA, was the head of the committee. And there was in '96 there were articles in the San Jose Mercury News, going back to the '80s to the Contra era, saying that the CIA had allowed funding of the Contras in Nicaragua by looking the other way at the importation of crack cocaine into South Central Los Angeles. So when this came out in '96, it created a big furor in South Central Los Angeles, and it resulted in some hearings happening, including the one that we took the script from. But what's interesting about the script is that they're doing this inquiry, but they have they do such a bad job, that we decided to do it very straight and with because it's so transparent, you can see the lies and the basically they're just doing it to cover up for the most part. And so we did it totally straight, but with people who were in LAPD or in a women's drug program that we were working with at the time, doing all the text. So it was like the people who were the on-the-ground experts of the effects of these policies were the witnesses, really monitoring the government in a certain way. And then afterwards, we always have these panels that address different issues that are brought up by the performance. And the issues are everything from treatment versus incarceration, there was a ballot initiative when we were in play when we first did the show, and then but it also covers Afghanistan, for example, which is where where the CIA was complicit with the Northern Alliance and drug runners in fighting the Soviets, and then they reinitiated that in order to fight the Taliban, and then it goes back to the Vietnam era when they were using the Hmong villages and stuff as to work with the CIA and covert operations and stuff. So we were able to like go from like inner city concerns and prison reform and all kinds of stuff to monitoring foreign policy. And we've done the show a bunch of times, usually in conjunction with an election where we thought there was going to be a ballot initiative. So that means we've gotten to look at, you know, the 2000 election, the 2002 election, the run-up to the war in Iraq, the 2004 election, et cetera. And we're actually making a book out of all these conversations, which include policy advocates, drug war historians, journalists who were like Robert Perry, who were who suffered severe consequences from reporting Iran-Contra in the first place, breaking a lot of the stories. Two people who were involved in arts and recovery programs, to people who were, you know, in the programs. So anyway, here's a short excerpt of the show and one of the panels.
Mr. Lewis. Mr. Hicks, I too appreciate your making the effort to come be with us here today. And I would like to express my appreciation for your long service to the country. Mr. Hicks, what were the CIA? Pardon me one moment, Mr. Hicks. Now, Mr. Hicks, what exactly were the CIA legal and regulatory responsibility from 1979 to 96 regarding the reporting of potential crime and the maintenance of relationships with persons suspected of involvement in drug trafficking?
Well, it was a movable feast, the requirements kept changing. From 1976 to 1982, it was an issue that was not really addressed. From 1982 to 1995, in an agreement then hammered out between Attorney General Smith and the Reagan administration, there was no requirement to report an allegation of drug trafficking with respect to non-employees of the intelligence agency. And during that period, that did not include agents of the CIA, did not include actors.
Mr. Bishop. Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me apologize for my delinquency in getting here, but I had a 2-hour mechanical delay with my flight, and I didn't want to rush that. But I am delighted to be here. I've read the report, and I have a few observations to make. The first of which is that I want to join my colleagues in commending you, Mr. Hitz, as you retire from the CIA. I want to take this opportunity to join them in thanking you for service to the agency and to our country. I would also like to make the observation that allegations of CIA involvement in the introduction and distribution of crack cocaine is very, very serious. And it really created a firestorm. In minority communities, it immediately generated comparisons to the Tuskegee syphilis study, where African Americans were injected with syphilis germs and were left untreated for the purpose of the study. The introduction of drugs, or the allegation of the introduction of crack cocaine into our community is equally bad and reprehensible.
It seems like if they're really serious, they wouldn't be sending money to fund a group like the military, paramilitary, who are just as involved as anyone else in Colombia. So how serious do you think it is? And I was struck by a comparison the Nixon administration and their success in Turkey, it seemed like they may have been more serious.
And what was distinctive about the Nixon era was that they took this idea of extirpating or eliminating drugs domestically, and they combined it with foreign policy using a military metaphor to create the drug war. And the thing about the drug war is, in fact, applying diplomacy, intelligence, military operations abroad to eliminating the supply and the smuggling of narcotics into the United States. And then the metaphor has, under subsequent administration, been elaborated and applied to domestic situations. So we've had a kind of a militarization of narcotics policy and a militarization of law enforcement over drugs in the country.
Sandra, would you also comment on that?
Yeah, mainstream politicians that devise these programs are thinking about, all of those bad people that do drugs, and they're thinking, thinking the moral argument that everyone's bad. And in the same way, in Colombia and other countries, the people who grow the drugs, who are also considered evil. And so I think we have to be really careful about when we talk about the war on drugs, because we found that before, there was members of the Black Caucus that wanted to send aid to Colombia because they didn't want the drugs to come into their communities. That means that they weren't thinking about who were the victims of the drug war in Colombia. Why are their campesinos addicted to growing coca? And we're supporting their death and their destruction, the destruction of the ecosystem in Colombia. In Colombia, there's 2 million displaced people, and of the inside the country that no longer have a place to live or work or make money or anything like that. And of those displaced people, about 70% are Afro-Colombian. People don't even realize that from a quarter to a third of the population in Colombia are of African ancestry. And so there are a lot of racial elements to this drug war, not only in the United States, but also in Colombia. And so when we want to talk about making changes, I think we really need to broaden our minds and think beyond our own borders.
So we have to try to look at the recovery of the people that's been victimized by these drugs, right? Because those are the people that we really have to try to help, right? The innocent people, right? We have to realize that I think, myself personally, that the government is like the enemy of the people.
Okay, so that was showing both the recreation of the original hearing and then a discussion that happened afterwards.
Right, and that was
with various people who had their own expertise on those issues.
Right, and then and that was in 2000. That was in January of 2001, I guess. So we thought the next war was going to be in Colombia, but we were wrong.
Right. Anyway, so that's a really great lead into the RFK and EKY piece, because it's really using a similar structure, the one that you developed with Agents and Assets, of a recreation and the addition of extra sort of forums to go deeper into whatever those issues are that are brought up by the recreation. And so then do you want to kind of quickly go into what happened with RFK?
Yeah, sure. So I was invited down to, Harold and I, we were both actually invited down to Apple Shop in eastern Kentucky. And we tried to get a couple different projects off the ground, and then for various reasons they didn't work out. And then this project did get off the ground, and it was picking up on the strategy of this, using a hearing of, and it turned out to be a hearing of Robert Kennedy going there in '68 as a field hearing for the Senate investigating hunger, but he actually used it to give a platform to people in the area to talk about environmental concerns, jobs, and poverty, and also it happened right after the Tet Offensive, so the war was also involved as an issue, and I chose that because after spending a little bit of time there, it was clear that the people down there were not really that interested in having they were sick of having outsiders come in and sussing out what was going on down there. So I figured if I picked something that existed down there And the motto for the project being to recreate everything and create nothing. And that would be better, you know. Then I could say, well, I'm just ignorant, and which I was. And but what happened actually was that event had a really a big glow around it. It was really a treasured event in the area, more than I knew when I decided to do that, because you know, because obviously there was the star power of Kennedy, and there were Kennedys, and he was the first actual you know, national politician to go down there. When Nixon came back after Watergate, he actually went to that area as well as his first appearance, but that's different. And so it had all those sort of like nostalgia, cultural heritage, all those kind of elements, as well as being something that looked at all these serious issues then and now. And like the rest of the country, you know, the political dialogue, I mean, this is why it was interesting to me. The political dialogue then is not what it is now. And so it was a way of, it turned out to be a way of convening people around to talk about things that were still issues, but to expand the political context in which you could, of the conversation. And then, like I say, you know, the whole war thing showed up as well. Like I started doing the project in 2000 or something like that, and but we did it right before the election in 2004, so that all became relevant also. So it went, and what I did do is I scrambled it, because it was a recreation of, it went from initially being the idea of doing one hearing, the central hearing of this visit, to actually sort of tracing the whole route, which was a 200-mile route through the mountains in 2 days with stops in about 10 different places, little hamlets and people's houses and stuff. And we actually did it in 4 days, and we put a few vents at each end, but we also sort of shuffled the deck and put some right in the middle. So it wasn't just a recreation. It was like in one place there was a one-room schoolhouse that was still standing that we did a cosmetic.
That Kennedy had actually spoken in.
Yeah, that he'd spoken, and that we had archival footage of him speaking, and that we knew the teacher, she was still alive. We had, from her, we got all the pictures of the kids, which you can see out there. Some of the kids were there, the cook was there. Peter Edelman, 2 of Kennedy's aides were there. Peter Edelman, who organized the tour, and Bill Arnone, who played a part he played somebody else in the show.
People who were originally there in '68 came back for the recreation.
Yeah, and Bill Grider, who writes for The Nation, had written me an email. He had covered it as a young reporter for the Louisville paper. So he wrote me this description of what had happened in this one little room, and because we had the archival footage, we recognized it. So we were able to put this all together as sort of an installation going into a community conversation. So it kept flipping modalities, and we had pancake breakfasts every morning and an unlimited supply of clothing that we got from East Letcher Ministries. Letcher is one of the counties down there, and we got it. The deal was we just didn't bring any of it back. That was the deal we got with them. And we had a couple. We found Dexter the Democrat, who has a couple. He had like an Edsel, and we had a couple old cars, you know.
Period clothes,
right.
and period vehicles and things like that.
Right.
To sort of.
But the idea was never to like collapse this moment into that moment. The idea was to have both moments present, which worked out really well budgetarily as well, you know. And so I think the little bit we're going to show is actually we made 3 DVDs about particular issues that we then distributed in the community for starting conversations after the project. And this one is about the war, and because of Harold's project, I thought this would be a cool one to show. Down there it says war. Let's play the movie, then we'll consider the questions later.
Although the war in Vietnam was not on Kennedy's agenda, the people of Eastern Kentucky repeatedly asked him how he felt about it. His visit happened in 1968 at the height of the war, and monies appropriated for the war on poverty in 1963 were already being rechanneled to fund the war.
About the Vietnam situation, air balloons are getting killed, and money's spent on it, and the people are hungry, the people are homeless, and do not have decent homes or decent
sociology at 240, sociology of the Southern Appalachian region, and also teaching history, teaching English as well. These times were, as Bill said, very terrible times. The Civil Rights Movement was one of the great movements of our country, and it was at its height to some degree. The African Americans have paid a terrible price with Medgar Evers' death and with the death of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders and all the others that were involved in that. But they largely won the war for freedom, the real war for freedom, which we have fought here in America. Many of our students have been drafted and were being drafted for service in Vietnam, and many were dying. Many people from East Kentucky were dying and throughout Kentucky in Vietnam and being wounded there as well. And so it was really a difficult time for students. I heard that Kennedy was going to have hearings on poverty in East Kentucky and adjoining county, and would be conducting these in various places. Immediately I told my wife that I wanted Robert Kennedy to come to Dallas Road College. His leadership might inspire, I believe, our students and might cause them to aspire toward better things. And the students, I tried to prep them for the questions they would ask me, because we were asked to sit down front and ask all the questions. And so I said, please don't ask him cranial questions, ask him heart questions. Because the way I read him, from the way I hear him, is that he's a person who speaks from the heart, as all his family does. And so, and I said, be sure and don't ask him anything about the Vietnam War, because the media is beating him to death on the Vietnam War. And so we came to the Cushing Hall. We sat on the right-hand side as you go in, on front. Senator Kennedy came in with Senator Cooper, I think, and certainly with Carl Perkins and some others there, a whole entourage of them, a lot of media people with them. And my students seemed impressed with them. A lot of students were around, they were excited. And after he spoke just a moment after the invitation, my smartest student, whose name was Barbara Thompson, shot her hand up, and she said to him, Senator Kennedy, what do you think about the Vietnam War?
What I've said regarding Vietnam, I've said many times. And just last Thursday in Chicago, I made a statement. And it's undeniable that the enemy in Vietnam can strike savagely and at will throughout all of South Vietnam. And the Tet Offensive shatters the mask of illusion that we have all used to blind ourselves from the true circumstances of that war. It's not all these things that happen. It's not because our soldiers are not brave. It's not because they're not effective fighting people. But what it is the misguided nature of this war. Because what we're trying to do is solve by military might questions that can only be resolved by the will and the conviction of the South Vietnamese. You can't expect people to risk their lives. You can't expect people to endure hardship unless they feel that they have a stake in society. Political reform, economic reform, are not fancy slogans or idealistic concepts that can be postponed until the end of the war.
I don't know what they ought to do about the Vietnam War. They ought to bomb. Do like Truman did. Let's bomb. Drop a bomb and wipe them all out.
Well, that's an interesting concept, but the United States cannot conduct a war based upon the subordination of moral standards just for immediate success. There are more things to consider. Okay, before we go on, let's see what we have here. Raise your hand. How many think that we should continue the Vietnam War the way we're conducting it now? Anyone? Now, I'm going to ask this very gingerly. Is there anyone else out there who thinks like the guy in the back? Just a few weeks ago during the Tet Offensive, there was a picture, and it was in papers throughout the world. And a suspected Viet Cong was taken to the chief of security of South Vietnam. And the picture showed the security chief taking a pistol and summarily executing that soldier. Clearly, that is in contravention of the Geneva Convention on the Rules of War. Now, our enemy, brutal. Our enemy has done that hundreds of times. But the reason we wage a war against communists is not to become more like them, but to preserve the differences between us and the communists. That picture appeared on the front pages of newspapers throughout the world. And some of our oldest allies, some of our best allies, said more in sorrow than in anger, what has happened to America? What we are trying to do by stopping the domino effect is to create a great society throughout all nations. That is a pretension. We should give adequate assistance to people in Asia. But we cannot establish in Asia a great society if we are unwilling and unable to create one here in America. We speak extravagantly about a struggle for 250 million Asians. How can we speak of such a struggle when a conflict in a country with 15 million people so strains our resources and divides our country? We were told Vietnam will settle all the difficulties in Asia, that it will somehow preserve the security of the United States. But that is a prayerful wish based upon mindless hope, allowing us to justify the already great sacrifices we have already made. The truth is, Vietnam will not protect America from its enemies. What it will do, if we follow the same path for the next decade or beyond, will involve the United States in a land war on the mainland of Asia. And our best and brightest military leaders have told us for many years now that will only lead to national tragedy. But we have a more immediate interest to preserve the lives of our young fighting men and to conserve the assets of America. The best way to save our most precious state in Vietnam is to halt the expansion of the war. The best way to end casualties in Vietnam is to end the war. We face an enemy that we are unable to defeat, and we are unable to break our enemy's spirit. So what we must now do is actively seek peaceful settlement. And in this peaceful settlement, we must bring in the Viet Cong in the society of South Vietnam. Not because we want to, but because that is the only way a peaceful settlement will ever be achieved. What we must not do is confuse the prestige attached to a single policy of American military might with the overall interest of the United States. We should not be unwilling to risk for peace if we are so willing to risk the lives of our soldiers at war. This nation must be told the truth, and the truth in all its reality. Not only because that's the right thing to do, because if you don't tell the truth, you will never be able to garner the necessary public unity that will follow us and what we will need to follow us through these shadow days that lie ahead. No war has ever required more bravery from its government and from its citizens. Bravery not just under fire. Our bravery not just to make sacrifice, but the bravery to discard the comfort of illusion. What we have now is a situation where the people in the highest levels of government will not tell us the truth. This is a great nation. This is a strong nation. They would rather not tell us the truth than risk the repercussions of.
Okay, so having been at the actual performance, and this was just before the 2004 election, it was, I think the feeling everyone was having was like, wow, this is what Robert Kennedy was saying in '68, and wouldn't it be great if Kerry was saying this in 2004? And of course, he wasn't. And so it was a really just, it was sort of this amazing and sort of disheartening combination of feelings that were sort of going on there, and then just to see the sort of parallels that were occurring between those two time periods, and then also knowing that Kennedy would declare that he was running for president soon after this visit to Eastern Kentucky, and then go on to win the California primary and be assassinated that same day. So that the hope that Kennedy's direction that he was indicating that he would actually sort of pull out of Vietnam was sort of ended at that point, and a whole sort of direction that the U.S. government and society would have gone in sort of was shattered. So it was a very poignant thing to have that recreated and realize the significance of that moment. And that was an amazing thing to experience there. Do you have any?
Two things. One, it was also right after Abu Ghraib. So the business about the photograph he was referring to is his famous photograph of somebody being shot at point blank, and so so it resonated against that as well. And the other thing is where Alice Lloyd College was founded by a Bostonian who went down there and carved a settlement school out of the wilderness, Alice Lloyd. Since '68, it had sort of been the board of directors had shifted quite a bit, and so that it had become a very conservative school, although it's still giving free tuition to kids from Appalachia. So it was sort of a coup to actually be on that college campus saying those words to those students. And in fact, if we'd gone on a little longer with this tape, it shows some of the rehearsal process where the kids immediately took it into a conversation about Iraq. They just totally flipped out and then apologized to me after an hour of impassioned conversation for not doing what they thought I wanted them to do. But in fact, they'd done it. But their views of the war were like quite shocking to me. But it was an incredible conversation.
Yeah. And so this, of course, too, was just one aspect of the recreation that hit on all of these other issues, and that we're not going to go into. But one of the things I wanted to ask in relationship to this was that oftentimes in the history of the work that we've been going over, you sort of cross the bounds between an art project, an art context, and social service kinds of situations. And one of the things that happened as part of the tour was bringing into play this group of people who were involved with the Head Start program in Fleming Neon, and having them do a presentation about their experiences over the last that period of time since Kennedy had been there originally. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering is sort of the hard impact that occurs in relationship to doing an art project that it seems like happens with your work, is that you actually have real effects that go beyond the art world effects.
Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, the Head Start, is a preschool program for kids who are living in poverty, right? And it started as part of the War on Poverty, and it's actually the most philosophically intact program out of that period because the funding, although the Bush administration has tried to change this, the funding goes directly from the federal government to the program. So, like for example, last time they were trying to reauthorize, they wanted to reroute the money to the State Board of Education, which would have had the effect of still the same amount of money going to kids that age, but not to the poorest kids in the state. You know, it would have gone to other kids. So, so philosophically, it was important to highlight that program because we were trying to give a sense of what the spirit of the War on Poverty was about. Also, the two women, Elise Jones and Jill Hatch, who run it, are like really extraordinary and just fun to be around. And the program, most of the staff, the teachers, the bus drivers, the cooks, are all women who started out as kids in the program. So it's been a real, you know, an amazing way of you know, realizing development in people and in the region. And they, after the project, Elise came to me and she liked the way me and my cohorts working in the community, and they wanted us to work with the Head Start program around changing the conversation around drug issues in the community. And there's a huge prescription drug, mainly OxyContin epidemic in that area, which OxyContin, you know, is a heroin, morphine-based painkiller, which was actually sort of target marketed to the coal mining areas. So the conversation about it has basically been, you know, that it's a law. It's been in the law enforcement context, like lock them up, you know, and so Elise wanted to change that conversation and make it more about a, you know, put it more in a public health context. So over the last year, me and my wife Henriette Browers and Michael Hunt, who originally brought me down to Eastern Kentucky, have been working with the staff of Head Start in the 4-county area. So like well, in one of the 4 counties that LKLP works with. So about 40 women, and getting mainly, we did a little bit of theater stuff with them last summer, and then we mainly did a lot of community organizing where they are leading bi-weekly conversations in each community, each of these 3 communities, for the parents, for anybody in the community to come and talk about the drug problem. So that means that included in the conversation are people, you know, who have kicked drugs, who are trying to kick drugs, the sheriff, and so it's created a conversation that, you know, really hasn't gone on there before, and it's really it's been very cool, and it's definitely having a huge impact in opening up different ways of looking at the problem. And because you know, Head Start themselves have to really, they've done a lot of advocacy just to keep their own program alive. You know, they know how to, you know, they know how to go from local conversation to taking it to Frankfurt, which is the capital, and, you know, taking it to the congressman, and really try. So it's all in process, but it's really, you know, I'm pretty excited about it right now.
Yeah. The other question, and you kind of touched on it earlier, was the idea that you're going into these situations oftentimes without a lot of knowledge about what's going on, but by working on the project, you yourself become educated on the issues and histories through this sort of experiential process. And how, in a way, it seems like that's almost like a motivation, is for you to personally become educated, and then through that, you make it available to a larger public as well.
You mean my motivation is to get educated?
Partly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And that's one, at very least, that's a result, is that you're becoming educated through your own projects, that they're forcing you to do research, and not just in a traditional way, but through experiential and person-to-person kinds of ways where you're learning about things that you might otherwise not ever be able to learn about, other than going into these places directly and having those kinds of conversations and process.
Well, I know when I started LAPD, for example, I thought, like, you know, because it was the Reagan years, and that was like motivation for doing something, you know, and you know, so I thought, well, I could go, you know, I could do something about. I mean, I wasn't thinking about. Yeah, I could do something about the war in Central America, you know. But I felt like I wanted to do something that I would actually could know about firsthand, and I guess I could have gone to Central America, a lot of other people did. But I thought, you know, I wanted to, know about something firsthand, not from reading the newspapers or reading books, you know, or something like that, which of course has become, you know, probably more important now that the news is more and more controlled than it was even then, you know. So yeah, there was a notion of being on the front line and being able to really find your own impressions. And in Skid Row, like I said, I was able to do it because I was, you know, I was taken in by and able to work with all these people who had been working there for a really long time and who had the trust of the neighborhood, and you know, so I learned from them. And then in Kentucky, I had I was given an insanely long period to develop a project. Like nobody else in their right mind would do that, probably. You know, it was an unusual opportunity. I mean, in other words, it wasn't going, okay, here's like, come down here for 2 weeks and research your project. It was like, I did like a year of research, you know, being there, talking to people, tracing the route, going to the library here, getting the transcripts, going back there, talking to people, hanging out at the post office all day, and having the postmistress, you know. Actually, this is one of the big breakthroughs, you know. Everybody who came in the post office said, where were you when Kennedy came? Do you remember? And then they'd take me to their house, and then they'd take me to somebody else. And like that. So, but that's the kind of opportunity you really need, and it's really hard to get that kind of opportunity.
Right. Okay, well, maybe we'll open up to a couple questions. Anybody out there have any questions about any of the stuff we've been talking about? Somebody must. Yeah.
This is just really basic. I might have even missed something. For one thing, I want to say I think it's amazing to see this. I mean, the resonance between then and now is just unbelievable. But who are your actors? I don't know who your actors were in this group. And did they travel with you the route? It was the same Kennedy in all the places?
Yeah, I thought about it. First of all, it was all people from eastern Kentucky, with two exceptions. One was Bill Arnone, who was one of Kennedy's aides, who heard about the project and came down and played a part. And then another friend of mine from New York who played Kennedy's other aide, actually. But it was all local actors, you know, local people, most of them acting for the first time. And yeah, Jack Faust, who was our Kennedy, and when we called him up, actually, he got in the project sort of late because the original person we had playing the role, he's a former coal miner now working as a nurse, and there were too much attrition in the nurses' ranks, and he couldn't get off the time. So we called Jack, who actually had done some community theater, and one of our other cast members told him about it, and he said, well, you know, really, I could probably do a better Teddy Kennedy than Bobby Kennedy. And I said, you know, it wasn't about a lookalike contest. You know, it was about spirit. That's what it was about. So it was even better that he looked like Teddy Kennedy. And but anyway, they were all local people. And Nell Fields, who worked on the project, there were 4 people that worked all the time: Henriette Browers, Michael Hunt, me. And Nell, who's a local person who's been involved in the community forever, and so she and all of us worked really hard recruiting people. But she has like incredible street credentials in the holler, and so that helped us a lot in getting a cast together. And we thought about switching Kennedys at each location, and we could have, but we didn't. And I mean, you know, we had to rehearse. You know, we would drive like 100 miles to rehearse with some people up in Vortex, and then over to Neon to do the other rehearsal and stuff like that.
Another question? Yeah.
I'm curious about, you mentioned Appalshop down in Kentucky. I'm curious about a little bit about them and how you work with them.
Well, Appalshop is also grew out of the war on poverty, actually. They were like, Carl Perkins, who traveled with Kennedy on this whole tour, was the 35-year congressman from that area, and so he was pretty powerful in the Congress. You know, and he was really into technical education. Like Perkins grants that you hear about are named after him, and he and some other people, they funded a certain number of video workshops, film and video workshops around the country, and they were all located in inner cities with the notion that people would learn these skills and get good jobs. But he got one for Eastern Kentucky, which was at Appalshop, or what became Appalshop, you know. And, but those guys decided, as it evolved, they decided, well, they didn't want to leave Eastern Kentucky, and like everyone else had to do to get a job, they wanted to stay in the community and represent the community from their own point of view rather than being represented by camera crews coming in from elsewhere. And so now there's still a filmmakers collective. They've made over 100 documentaries. There's a community radio station which you can get on the web, WMMT, which is very eclectic community radio. So sometimes it's bluegrass and sometimes it's Democracy Now! And it's all kinds of stuff. And they do a lot of media training with youth. Our project has been a project of Appalshot, and they have a traditional music project. They have a music school in the summertime, which would be definitely a nice way to spend a week in June. So,
anybody else? Okay, thanks a lot.